The midterm elections are still not over, 6 days after Election Day, with a number of races still to be decided. CBS News currently estimates the House is leaning Republican, with the GOP holding at least 214 seats and Democrats total sitting at 210, but 218 seats are needed to control the chamber. And in the Senate, Democrats will keep their majority. The runoff race in Georgia between Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and his challenger Herschel Walker will be held on December 6th to determine who gets the final Senate seat. Now comes what President Biden can get done before the next session of Congress is sworn in on January 3rd. Appearing on Face the Nation Sunday, senior advisor to the president, Anita Dunn, talked with moderator Margaret Brennan about what the administration's priorities are during the upcoming lame duck session of Congress.
We have to keep the government open and funded. That is obviously priority number one. Other lame duck priorities will certainly include additional funding for Ukraine, which has been, and the president has said he hopes will continue to be, a bipartisan issue in the United States Congress. Obviously, emergency funding for the natural disasters that Florida and Puerto Rico suffered earlier this year, and additional priorities for the administration as well. But keep the government open and running is the number one priority.
For more, I'm joined by two of my CBS News colleagues. Political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is right here with me at the desk, and chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us here at the Washington Bureau. Thank you both for being here today. Robert, I want to start with you because we just heard from Anita Dunn, who seems optimistic about, what more they can do. President Biden has already invited leaders of both parties to join him at the White House when he gets back from the G20. But there's still a big question about who that leadership is going to be when the new session of Congress starts. Of course, House Republicans are already gearing up to take over, and Kevin McCarthy has thrown his hat into the ring. But how likely is it that he is going to win, given some pushback that we're hearing about from members of his own party?
Weijing and Caitlin, it's good to be with you. We're looking at a very fluid moment right now in Washington. To build on your own reporting, what we're seeing in the House Republican Conference is a real debate over the party's future. It does look like, based on my conversations with members today, that Kevin McCarthy has the votes to be the leader of the House Republicans, but he's going to face some tough questions this afternoon in a candidate forum, a private closed-door meeting where they're going to talk about who should be the leader, who should be the majority leader, who should be the majority whip. The most competitive race at this moment is for that number 3 spot, should the Republicans have the majority whip. You have Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana, Congressman Tom Emmer, and others eyeing that leadership slot. And on the Democratic side in the House, Speaker Pelosi has long been expected to potentially move out of the House or leave the leadership at some point should the Democrats lose big in November. But of course, they did not lose big. It's a very narrow margin in the House, and she's being encouraged by some of her members, which she has acknowledged publicly, to stay in the leadership. Looming over all of this in the coming days will be former President Trump's announcement on Tuesday. His aides say he's likely to formally launch a 2024 presidential bid. And so all of this is politically stirring the pot in Washington at a very tense time for both parties, but especially for Republicans who have a reckoning about where they want to go.
And it's not only affecting Congress, of course, it's affecting the party at large. Can you talk about how the results from the midterm elections is already having an impact on leadership within the GOP?
You're seeing an active race right now for the Republican National Committee, but not necessarily something that's playing out in public. This is very inside politics, but it's revealing about the GOP at this moment. Ronna McDaniel, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, the chairwoman, she is someone who has a lot of support in the Trump wing of the party, and she's not facing a formal challenge yet, but there's chatter among my sources on the RNC about whether she should maybe exit out. And we saw earlier today, CBS News has confirmed that the co-chair of the party, Tommy Hicks, has decided that he will not run for a third term. So you see the co-chair of the GOP, of the Republican National Committee, saying today, not going to run again for a third term. He cited family in his letter. But this comes at a time when many RNC members, RNC donors are calling up CBS News and others and saying maybe this is a crossroads, a time for a new leadership. But if you're going to take on Ronna McDaniel, the chair, you're going to have to run a real race against her, because despite what happened last week in the midterms, the disappointment, she does still have a lot of support.
And Caitlin, I know you got one of those calls today. Over on the Senate side, you spoke with a Republican operative who works on Senate races. How are they grappling with the fact that they were unable to take control despite, everything that we were hearing before Election Day?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of finger pointing going on, especially since Republicans have pointed out to us that they not only lost independent voters, but they also didn't have their base of support turn out in the numbers that they needed. And I think what's really interesting in my conversations with Republicans, at least, is that there has really been no sugarcoating the results. They haven't been saying, well, at least we won. I mean, some have, but most of them are not saying, well, at least we won the majority. It was an underperformance. And it was Republicans I've been talking to have acknowledged that underperformance. There's a lot of finger pointing going on between Mitch McConnell's group and the NRSC, which is run by Rick Scott. Remember, several months ago, they kind of had a public falling out when Rick Scott introduced his plan for moving forward. He was criticized for what it said about taxes and health care and Social Security. But his argument at the time was, we need to have a plan and tell the American people what we will do if we win. And talking to sources that are familiar with these Senate races, they have said that, if you're losing independents and not turning out your base, there's lots of blame to go around, but it also points to the Republican Party not having a message for what they would do. A source I talked to essentially said, we've been telling people not to vote for the other guy, but what would we do in its place? And in that void, you had Democrats able to seize on a lot of different things, on democracy, on abortion access in particular, became a motivating factor. And so what's interesting this time around is there are a lot of Republicans acknowledging what happened, trying to find a way forward, but a lot of people blaming each other.
The message about what they would do was not clear, but the message about what they believed was wrong was very clear.
Right.
They were blaming Democrats for inflation and really discounted how much abortion would play a role. And in your reporting, you found that it was a lot.
It was really interesting because when you look at specific races in Pennsylvania, where we saw Democrats flip a Senate seat in their favor, and in Michigan, where you saw Democrats keep the governorship but flip the state Senate and the state House to Democrats. They had that ballot measure on abortion, literally on the ballot. But we saw in those two states that abortion access as an issue outpaced concern about inflation. So people that I've talked to on the organizing side, on the campaign side, have said that this was a very motivating factor for people, and that the Democratic base was really asleep, essentially, until that Dobbs decision. And this certainly awakened that. And Republicans I've been talking to, and kind of those in the pro-life movement, have said that Republicans kind of ran away from the issue. They didn't necessarily engage in it, and they ended up potentially depressing their base. They point to that in Pennsylvania as well. And it will no doubt be an issue in 2024 as well, which, Robert, you mentioned earlier, because tomorrow we are expecting a big announcement from former President Trump. The former Vice President, Mike Pence, recently sat down with ABC News, and I want to play a clip from what he said about Trump. And
it angered me. But I turned to my daughter, who was standing nearby, and I said, it doesn't take courage to break the law. It takes courage to uphold the law. I mean, the president's words were reckless. It was clear he decided to be part of the problem.
Bob, we didn't hear that message during January 6th or even in the weeks right afterward. More and more, the former vice president's message has become more explicit in condemning Trump. What does it tell you about his own aspirations that he's willing to, so explicitly call out Trump now?
Based on our reporting here at CBS News, former Vice President Pence very much wants to run for president in 2024, is moving in that direction. He has not formally announced anything, but he has winked at it, hinted at the idea at appearances in recent months. And this all comes ahead of his new book, which is coming out, called So Help Me God. And this talks about his experience as vice president in the Trump administration. What's revealing about all of this is that Pence, on one hand, has so much ambition to still be a part of national politics, to lead the Republican Party potentially, and he doesn't want to go to total war with former President Trump because he wants to win over the Trump coalition at some level, but he doesn't want to be seen as a supplicant to Trump. And as he carves out his own independent space inside the GOP potentially, he is revealing more of the truth of the moment of January 6th and what he believes happened and how he processed it as the vice president at the time. It's notable that he was asked to come before the January 6th committee. This is Pence coming forward in his own way, not before Congress. This is not under oath testimony. This is an interview with ABC News, his own book. And so Pence is on a political terrain that's going to be complicated as he moves toward a 2024 run. And the questions about January 6th will continue to persist as that investigation continues.
And I know both of you will be on that rocky road together. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Robert Costa, thank you.
Thank you.